Welcome to Business Legal Lifecycle TV, the live TV show all about the legal aspects of your business to help educate you on complex legal terms in an easy to understand manner, to help understand why you need to do certain things in your business from a legal point of view, and to help you develop a plan for the future. Our mission at Business Legal Lifecycle is to help empower all small to medium-sized businesses around the world to get access to legal advice so that they can help build their communities and make the world a better place. Hi everyone, and welcome to Business Legal Lifecycle TV and our podcast. My name's Jeremy Stretton, one of the founders of Business Legal Lifecycle, and I'm here with Craig Mason. Say hello to everyone, Craig.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us.
So today is the second Wednesday in December 2018 when this is going live, and today we're doing our new format where we do a training show about our thoughts on a particular phase. And the theme for December 2018, if you listen to this in the future, is phase 3, initial clients of the business legal lifecycle. And today you've got a special treat because I'm interviewing Craig about this topic. So Craig, I'm not going to hold back with any questions. So, hope you're ready.
Yep, fire it will.
So we're going to talk about a few different topics. So phase 3 is all about initial clients. So we're going to talk about ideal clients, about finding your ideal client, engaging with your clients or customers, and what to do in those situations. So if you're ready to go, we'll kick into ideal clients.
Yep, let's go.
So let's go to the first one. Can you talk about why it's important to find your ideal client?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's extremely important to find your ideal client in your business because you can't service every single person that's out there. You need to find your niche, and in order to do that, you concentrate on what your ideal client is, and you go through the process, which I'll explain, no doubt, later on in one of the questions, and we've explained previously in other shows about finding your ideal client. And it's a good exercise to go through. Obviously, you can work out where your clients are, what they're interested in, those sorts of things, and tailor your particular marketing or product towards that. But it's very important to take that first step to actually find your ideal client, work it out, discuss it with your team, those sorts of things. So then you've got a method and a process in place. You might have a larger type team. You might have an ideal client or a different ideal client for a particular part of the business if it's distinct from each other. But the most important thing is actually to sit down and go through the process to find your ideal client so you can target them and niche into that area. So
yeah, great.
Pretty important. A lot of people don't take the time to work it out and just service all and sundry.
Yeah, and we'll get into finding your ideal client in a little bit later. We'll get some practical information for people. But before we do that, can you talk about the 5 1s? So this is something that we learned with our business coach, mentor. Do you want to talk about what that means and why that's important?
Yeah. So the 5 1s is one ideal client, which I just spoke about. Then it's one lead channel or traction channel. So that's how you're getting leads into your business. Then there's one sales process that is, would encourage everyone to be, and in the 5 1s to be a simple process. Then you've got one core program or core product or whatever it might be. And then for 1 year, you focus on that process for 12 months, obviously, or 1 year. So that's the 5 1s, one ideal client, one traction channel, one sales process, one core product or program, and for 1 year. Why is it an important process to go through? Well, it's got some structure to it, rather than you've got your ideal client, which I said you need one of for in your team. You can have a variety of lead channels and traction channels. So that's social media or speaking engagements or some form of marketing to get leads into your business. You may have several that you can utilize, but under the 5 1s, you find one. Then you've got your sales process. That's where leads come into your business, how they're dealt with, the conversations that are had in order for that to be funneled through to your core program or product. And with anything, you concentrate on it for 1 year rather than leaving it open-ended. You've got a specific goal in place then, and you can concentrate it on and focus on that for 1 year. And then you move on to the next one. Yeah. Obviously, during your business, you might be doing other things at the same time, but this is the 5 ones to concentrate. That's your big rock for 12 months.
Cool. So when you're thinking about your ideal, what are some of the key considerations to think about? And we'll talk about finding your ideal client in a minute, but what are some of the things, like the overarching broad things that people need to think about?
Yeah, so obviously no two businesses are the same. Different situations, different geographical areas, all those sorts of things affect your ideal client, what industry you're in, etc., etc. So you need to really consider that, what your business is, where you are, what you're selling, those sorts of things. And you really need to think about why you're even doing it in the first place, and the goals for the business, because that fits into that. And you need to incorporate your ideal client and the 5 ones into your business to reach the particular goal that you're targeting for whatever period of time you're thinking about. But it's got to come into the business. There's no point sort of doing it and not doing it. So when you're sitting down to start the process, you really need to think about why you're doing it, how you're going to incorporate it into the business, and what your goals are for the next 12 months, 3 years, whatever it might be that you're thinking about.
Yeah, well, I think that's a great foundation. That gives people a good understanding of what an ideal client is, what they need to do, and how they can use it. Let's talk about finding your ideal client. Let's get into that. We've done a little bit of this in the education show last week, but can you talk about what we need to do to find an ideal client? Give some practicals for people for the workbook.
Yeah. So what we've used and what a lot of people recommend is you need to build your ideal client avatar. So we chatted about that back in show 122 with Dave Scott, and as you just said, we spoke about it recently as well in our other show that we did about building your actual client avatar. So the process that we've gone through, and it's been provided to us, and a number of other people have recommended the process, rather than just sort of sitting there and making it up as you go along. There's questions you need to answer. There's a number of personal details. So the age of the person, are they married, do they have kids? All those sorts of personal details helps build your client avatar. Obviously, we're in business, so we want to go through their business details as well. If you're in the industry of business-to-business transactions, and you want to find out what their business is, and work out what their turnover might be, all those sorts of things that help you know that the person can either afford your product or needs your product. It also allows you to work out, your ideal client might be that they drive a luxury sports car. Then you know that you potentially could be targeting, as part of your marketing, a luxury sports car brand, and sort of tailoring any marketing that you do towards that. So you need to go through their personal details, and of course the business details. A number of questions to go through, which we explained previously, and there's no real magic to it. The questions are simple ones, and it's just a matter of getting as much information together as you possibly can in order to build your actual client avatar. So at the end of it all, and after you do the next step we're going to talk about with the ideal client avatar, you'll have a sheet of paper that'll explain it all. Our ideal client is such and such, 42 years of age, lives in Toogoolawah, drives a Honda, whatever it might be, is all spelt out. And then obviously that is part of your process with the team, so they're all aware of it as well. And before you finalise your client avatar, you should also take a deeper dive into your ideal client. Think about their emotions. Why are they doing what they're doing? What do they need? What problems do they have? All those sorts of things, and really go into their emotions. Might seem like a bit of a strange process, but I definitely would encourage everyone to do it, because there's a lot of value that you get from it. You may not use it all. Some of the questions you might think are relevant, etc. But it's an important process to go through it all, and then build your client avatar from there. And these sorts of things may change, obviously, as things develop, and as you increase business, whatever it might be. You might need to change your ideal client slightly or adjust it. It's definitely not something that you do on the first day of business and then put in a drawer somewhere and never look at again. So you definitely want to check it out more often than not.
And for anyone who is interested to find out a bit more, in show 156, so businesslegallifecycle.com.au/156, we did our education show last week, and we went through all those details, didn't we, about what to look for the ideal client. And,
yeah, absolutely.
And there's a pretty comprehensive worksheet on that one too. So yeah, feel free to have a look at that one. So let's talk about, you've found your ideal clients, and let's talk about the engaging with them, because I think this is something that people get wrong more often than not. So what are the different ways of engaging with your clients and customers?
Yeah, okay. So as Jeremy said, you've found your ideal client. Now you're actually getting some of those clients in the door, hopefully, and you now need to engage with them. So it really just depends on the type of business. If you're selling products over the counter for cash, then you don't necessarily need a written agreement, because the transaction or the contract basically is finished at that stage. Depending on your product, you might have warranties and all those sorts of things, but that's sort of separate to that. If you're providing any product or service on credit, so that is if you're a supplier and you're providing to your customers a number of products and they don't pay for those products until 30 days after the end of the month or whatever it might be, then you absolutely need to tailor the way you engage with those customers, and you need some form of agreement. If you're providing services, so you're not getting paid up front, you're doing the service and then getting paid at a future date, again, you need some form of engagement document with those clients or customers to make sure that all the terms and conditions and those sorts of things that govern that transaction and that agreement are spelt out. So they're the sort of different ways you'd be engaging with your clients. If your clients are government departments, for instance, then sort of throw all this out the window. You're going to be greeted with probably a contract from that government department as to how you're going to provide them the service or product. You're not necessarily going to be able to engage the way that you will want to with your documents. So it really depends on your type of business, what you're selling, and how you're providing it, whether you're getting paid up front, those sorts of things you need to think about. And I think they're probably the main ways that you'd be engaging with your clients or customers.
Yep.
So
sounds good. So let's do a bit of a deeper dive onto credit. Yeah, why do you need an agreement if you're providing credit? So what a lot of people probably don't understand what the reason is behind that.
Yeah. Okay. So obviously, if you're credit, just like a bank, essentially, you're giving someone something and they're not paying for it until a future date. So then why it becomes important to have some form of document in place is that if that person doesn't pay you or that company doesn't pay you, you've got something to fall back on in relation to an agreement. The things that we see a lot when in credit, where people are providing goods specifically, is that in order to proceed against someone, for instance, if they don't pay, if you don't have an agreement, you don't have all the details, you don't have the address, you don't have the important information that you need in order to pursue someone. So at the very least, you need that, and then obviously there's terms and conditions in place as well. So the whole point of when you're providing credit is you're essentially giving them a whole heap of goods that you can't sell to someone else, and you're not getting paid for a period of time. So you take that on board as part of your business, and there's industries that this sort of thing is day to day. You can't avoid it in things like the supply industry for building and construction and those sorts of things. Most suppliers in that industry that I know about, at least, are providing goods on credit. Yep. Even your Bunnings and those sorts of things, they're providing goods on credit, and then they get paid later. So they have conditions in there. If you don't pay, there's certain consequences that essentially, and the point of those is to put you back in the same spot had you been paid in the first place, so interest and those sorts of things. So it's important to provide, when you're providing credit, you've got a document that you can fall back on, because unfortunately there are times where you don't get paid, or you don't get paid on time, and you may need to rely on the agreement. So it's important to have one in place, and you can't introduce these sorts of things later after you've given the goods. Obviously, you need to do it beforehand. So definitely important to have an agreement in place when you're providing goods or services on credit.
Cool. So what about an engagement letter? You mentioned it before, and we've talked about it before, but can you explain to the listeners and the viewers what is an engagement letter and why it's important?
Yeah, so an engagement letter is more for your professional services or services based. So your accountants, lawyers, and things like surveyors, those sorts of service providers will have, rather than what's normally called in the industry a credit application, they'll have an engagement letter. And it's just as it described, it's a letter and dictate or outlines the terms and how the agreement's going to take place, and then that person that you've sent that letter to then agrees to it. So they're engaged, and you've now got an agreement based on what's in that letter. So as I said, professional services have them, and other service-based businesses, rather than sort of a credit application, which is your supply of products on credit. It's more for the service-based. It has most of the same terms and conditions. It's just spelt out in a letter rather than in a credit application and terms and conditions in columns. So it's just as important, obviously, to have the engagement letter. And again, you need to think about who you're actually engaging with, and making sure all those details are correct and that it's signed and those sorts of things. So it's sort of goes hand in hand with your business, and rather than a credit application, it's in a letter. So
cool. Yep. All right. And what about terms and conditions? What are they, and how do you make them binding? Because a lot of people, I think, don't realise that they may have terms and conditions that aren't actually binding on their customers and clients.
Yeah. So as I touched on before, these sorts of things need to be done before you give the product to them or provide the service. There's no point providing a service or providing goods to someone and then afterwards saying, oh, by the way, all these terms and conditions now apply. You need to provide them with, or give them an opportunity to read through the terms and conditions prior to them actually agreeing to buy from you. So if you don't do it, then you're going to come into some trouble in order to have them apply. If you change your terms and conditions along the way, then you should notify everyone that the terms and conditions have been changed and they're now available wherever. So most people have them on a website or a link somewhere, or in a credit application, you're providing your application and the terms and conditions. So when they're signing off on that, they've read, or probably haven't read, but at least you've given it to them, the terms and conditions, and they're signing off that they understand them, and it is now part of the agreement. So it's important to give it to them, or give them an opportunity or a link prior to them agreeing to buy from you or engaging in the service. So it's in your engagement letter, or it's in your credit application with your terms and conditions, or there's a link somewhere outlined on there. So in terms of what they are, it's obviously the terms of the agreement. So without them, it's all open-ended and there's no real clarity, and they're not designed necessarily to be one-sided. And we'll no doubt touch on that. We touched on that a few weeks ago as well with the unfair contract terms. It's supposed to be to govern the transaction for both parties. So it outlines things like default clauses if invoices aren't paid, those sorts of things. But also a lot of them particularly in the building industry, outline if there's any defective goods, how that's to be dealt with, or deliveries aren't done on time, or whatever it might be. It outlines what ramifications they are for that, and that's for both parties as well. So it's not just one-sided to the buyer, against the buyer. Sorry, it outlines the full agreement, so everyone's on the same page. They know how everything's going to be dealt with, and if they don't do certain things, then other things are going to happen. So it's important to have them, and if people have got questions about it, then sit down and talk to them about it, and you can cross things out if they don't want to agree to certain things, but it's better to have everything in there in the first place than nothing at all. So
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah, cool. All right. Well, let's talk about unfair contract terms. They came in a couple of years ago now. So you want to talk about what they are and how business owners need to be wary of them?
Yeah. So as you said, they came in November 2016. This is in Australia, obviously. So it's part of the Australian consumer law and applies to standard form business contracts. And it's previously provided since July of 2010, I think, for business to consumer contracts. So it's really, as I said, unfair, and it's trying to eliminate certain unfair contract terms from agreements that have been allowed to be in there for some time. So it's important as a business and as a small business that now you're aware that unfair contract term provisions do apply to your agreements. There's not much out there in terms of decisions made about it yet in Australia, and it is really a common sense type approach when it comes to what might be considered as unfair. So under the definitions, to be unfair, a term must cause a significant imbalance in the parties' rights and obligations under the contract, not be reasonably necessary to protect the legitimate interests of the party advantaged by the term, and cause detriment, financial or otherwise, to a small business if it were to be applied or relied upon. A lot of the examples that are out there are about rolling contracts that automatically roll over for another period of time. And the example is that if it's a 12-month contract and you've got to give notice 6 months prior to the expiry of the first term of 12 months, otherwise it automatically rolls over, could be considered unfair. And as I said, I think that's probably a common sense type thing, that if you've got a 12-month contract and you've got to give 6 months notice to terminate it, it seems a bit unfair. So those are the sorts of things that I'll be looking at in terms of unfairness. If it is found that there is a term that's unfair, it doesn't mean that the whole agreement gets thrown out. It's just the particular clauses in there. Yep. And obviously, if the particular clauses are, the real good ones that are now considered to be unfair, then obviously your contract's going to be heavily watered down. So it's definitely something you need to have a look at. As I said, it's a standard form contract, and then there's definitions about small business, employing less than 20 people, etc. It all depends on the contract price as well for the particular thing that you're doing, and so you need to make sure that you're on that. And with rolling contracts, it is the total value of all the periods as well, so you've got to be careful about that. And as I said, there hasn't been that many decisions about it, but it's something that's definitely going to keep coming up more often than not over the next few years, I would say, in Australia, where unfair terms are getting struck out, and there's going to be lots of litigation about it. So better to look at it now and have a think about it. And as I said, this is really something that you're presenting to someone, and you want it to be as fair as possible on both parties. Obviously, if they don't pay you, then you want to have certain rights, but in terms of the actual agreement and how it's going to work, then it should be fair to everyone. So I think it's good legislation, and hopefully it sorts a few things out. And as I said, I think there's going to be a lot more things happening in this space over the next couple of years. So cool.
As you know, that's the thing that the ACCC is going after quite a bit. So people should check out our monthly legal updaters each month, where quite often we include an unfair contract term. And in fact, 159, which will be on Friday the 14th, has actually got one in there, Craig. The ACCC have announced that they've, whilst they haven't taken anything to court as yet, they've not many things to court. They have got agreements from other providers to actually remove those unfair contract terms.
It seems like a lot of things are getting sort of resolved outside of court.
Yep.
Which, as I said, means that there's not as many decisions out there about what can be considered unfair. But there's plenty of commentary out there that, if you're interested in it, check it out. and have a think about if you've got terms and conditions in place and you've got an agreement, whether you think you might be falling foul of these provisions. So, yeah.
It seems like it would be common sense. It should be common sense, shouldn't it? So hopefully the
I think
common sense
so.
prevails. And from the cases that we've seen, common sense is prevailing. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so so I think that's probably enough on unfair contract terms. What about personal guarantees? This is something that you and I bang on a lot about, but what is a personal guarantee?
Yeah, absolutely. We do bang on a lot, and there's good reason for that. So a personal guarantee in the context we're talking about here is where someone personally guarantees payment of the debt on behalf of someone else. So in this particular thing that we're talking about today, it'll be where you're providing a good or service to a company, and you have a director or someone personally guarantee the obligations under the agreement. So the upshot of it is that, and it doesn't have to be a director that necessarily signed it. It's not a director's guarantee that we're talking about. We're talking about a personal guarantee. So it doesn't matter if the person's not a director or ceases to be a director, which is an important distinction. But it's as it says, where they personally guarantee that they'll comply with whatever it is in the agreement in terms of payment and those sorts of things. And you want to have it properly drafted and make sure that it's enforceable. But yeah, I mean, most people would have signed a personal guarantee when they, if they've ever had any loans through their business. If it's a company, most of the time, or even credit cards, those sorts of things, you're going to have to personally guarantee that debt as an individual. And the whole point of all that, of course, is that most people as an individual have assets, whereas companies tend to have no assets, or not a lot of assets and a lot of debt. So you want to always have personal guarantees, and also should also, I was going off track, but something that I always say to people, when you do sign personal guarantees, make sure you keep a record of what things you have signed as well.
Yep.
Because you might need them one day. So
I just wanted to just reiterate something you said before about the difference between a personal and a director's guarantee. A lot of people think they signed something called a director's guarantee and it won't be binding on them if they're no longer a director, and that's just simply not the case in most of them, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And
we have plenty of occasions.
And it's the kind of thing that if you've signed it and you think you're not going to be bound, get advice from your lawyer, get them to read it, get them to tell you whether or not you're actually bound by it, because it's something that people miss all the time, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. If there's changes in a business and someone's removed as a director or resigns as a director, and if say it's your business, and you're leaving the business, then you need to take some steps to get that released. If it's one of your customers, then you're probably going to get something from someone saying, I'd like to be released from this guarantee because I'm no longer part of that business. And that's fair enough. It's you don't have to necessarily release them, I guess, but you would think that given that you're dealing with a business, not that person, that you would probably release them on the basis that someone else is coming in as a director or whatever, that they sign a personal guarantee. So yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, you kind of preempted my last question, but I'm going to just ask it anyway. Is there any other reason why you should get a personal guarantee? So if you're the supplier, or you're supplying services, are there any other reasons other than what you mentioned before about companies not having a lot of money that as to why someone should get a personal guarantee?
Well, yeah. I mean, I guess that's the main one, is that the companies, if they go into liquidation, for instance, then you can still sue the guarantors. If they're in administration, then you won't be able to pursue the guarantors during that process, but in liquidation you can. And even if they're not in liquidation, you can still proceed against guarantors. You don't need to, depending on how the guarantee is drafted, go after the company in the first instance. You know, in terms of the personal guarantee, there are other clauses in there provided it is drafted, and this is not something that you'd be copying off. It's definitely important to have it tailored towards your business, but personal guarantees, a lot of them will have charging clauses within them. The effect of that is that you can lodge a caveat over someone's property. So rather than having to sue them and get judgment and go through the enforcement process, you can lodge a caveat on their property, and go through the process of enforcing a caveat, which again still requires legal proceedings, but it sort of cuts down on a number of the steps. So you can put a caveat on there, which you can't do if you don't have a personal guarantee. So that's one of the other important things that is utilised a lot in the building industry and the suppliers within that, putting caveats on properties, which obviously stops that person from selling that property without paying you, provided it's a proper caveat and those sorts of things. But that's one way of getting paid, which is quite effective. So I think without the personal guarantee, the amount of things that we see having to be written off because they couldn't pursue a director is mind-boggling how many times it happens. So it's really important to get it. And one of the other things with the personal guarantee, when you provide that to the prospective customer, it's a good indication if they start crossing things out. Oh, I don't want to sign that, or whatever they're saying, for you to say, oh, okay, well, that's interesting that you're saying that to me. And it gives you an opportunity to then say, well, I'm not willing to do business with you, or you take the risk and you provide the good or service. So it's sort of that test that you've got in your documents as to whether or not they're legitimate. And if they're not willing to sign it, obviously you're thinking, are they going to pay me? It could be for a variety of other reasons. Some people just don't sign personal guarantees because they understand how important they are and how they can be used against them, so they just simply don't sign it. But it can be a way of you sort of filtering out the people that might become problems in the future. Perhaps part of your ideal client is that they're willing to sign personal guarantees and they provide goods to it. So think about it.
We should add that to our one.
Yeah.
All right, Craig. So, look, you've provided everyone with a lot of value today. Hopefully, the listeners and viewers get into the workbook and have a look at the show notes, because a lot of the stuff that we talked about here, it doesn't just apply for a startup business. It applies for even a business that's been operating for 10 years. It's always time to revisit these things, and December is the best time of the year to do that as things start to slow down for Christmas. But, Craig, as I said, thank you very much. Is there anything else you want to add that we haven't talked about Phase 3 that you think it's important that you want to get across to the listeners and viewers?
I think the most important thing about what we've spoken about today is just the fact that you need to get advice about these sorts of things during this phase of your business. It's very important that you get it now, get your advisors involved, because it's not the time, and I see a lot of businesses that are in this phase copying and pasting from someone else and creating their own documents. Whilst that's going to become a lot cheaper, it could become a lot more expensive down the track, where you've got all sorts of weird and wonderful clauses in there that apply if you're in California but don't apply if you're in Brisbane, Australia. So it's important to seek the advice and get proper terms and conditions that are tailored towards your actual business, and sit down with your advisors where they actually talk about what are you doing, etc., etc. So important at this phase not to be copying and pasting. I think that's a general rule for any phase of your business, but I think it's particularly important. You see it a lot at this stage of sort of the copy and paste type job. And the same goes with your ideal client as well. Just because you're in the same sort of industry as someone else and you know who they target, it doesn't mean that that's your ideal client for your business. So it's important to really give it some critical thought, and not to sort of rely on everyone else's idea out there, because if you do that, then you mightn't be successful in your business. So important to really think about these sorts of things now before you go out and spend a whole heap of money on things that you shouldn't be. So.
Absolutely. Well, as I said, thank you very much. That's it for today. Thank you for watching and listening wherever you're consuming our content. Remember to get on there and give us a review on Apple Podcasts if you're listening to us on that, or wherever you're getting your podcasts. That helps get it up in the rankings so other people can share the information that we're giving out in our podcast and our YouTube. If you're viewing this, and hello if you are, make sure that you like it on YouTube and give us a thumbs up, and maybe give us a review on there too. Show notes and the workbook will be at businesslegallifecycle.com.au/158, so you'll be able to download those. And yeah, thanks for watching, and we'll be back on Friday with our monthly legal update. See you then.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.